the Europeans, not stupid, we are watching what's going on in Nigeria, and we too are beginning to feel there's something not quite right here, that maybe the elections are not going to be as straightforward as they're meant to be. Nigeria was being described as the showcase of democracy, and it was expected that the nationalist leaders would win through. But actually, when the election results were announced by the Governor-General, before the vote was even in, didn't count for that, he didn't wait for that. I have to tell you, the British were counting the votes, and the British cannot be trusted. They look after their friends. Loyalty is the big thing for the British, and we were friends with the emirs of the north. We looked on people like Inaharo and Awolowo as rather dangerous people. They might even be communists. That's ridiculous, actually. They couldn't be communists in 1,000 years.
Today's report examines a chilling confession that may change how we view Nigeria's independence forever. Former British colonial officer Harold Smith made a stunning revelation. He was recruited by the British government and sent to Nigeria with a mission, not to observe democracy, but to sabotage it. According to Smith, Nigeria's first democratic election was never intended to be fair. It was rigged before the ballots were even cast.
Mr. Arrowsmith, you were featured in a program recently by BBC Radio 4,
yes.
Titled Document,
yes.
And that was hosted by Mr. Mike Thompson.
Yes.
You were alleged that the British government rigged the first and most important election in the history of Nigeria in 1959 in favor of the North. Am I correct?
Yes.
How long were you in Nigeria for?
From 1955 to 1960. And we were based in Lagos. I was on the staff of the Department of Labour. I was largely occupied with employment problems, all the employment exchanges, and statistics and international reports, and was kept pretty busy. I was also stationed in Lagos in charge of the capital and the port. I was the port labour officer as well, and I also devised a port labour scheme and later a social security scheme, which was one of the first in Africa, which guaranteed workers some income after they'd finished work. It was a providence scheme. As I say, it was called the National Providence Scheme, and I was very proud to have put that on the statute book.
I was going to ask you what your role is. You've mentioned three important. Is there any particular name given to your office while you were there?
Just labour officer.
I was a labour officer, a senior civil servant.
Okay.
I only intended to stay in Lagos initially for 2 tours of duty. Although, because of this conflict with the elections, there were difficulties. Actually, government wouldn't let me leave the civil service. They were determined that I should stay in the civil service after my 2 tours. And I was offered very considerable incentives, including a knighthood, to stay and work for government. Primarily this was because I had access to state secrets. I learned, and the Governor-General himself confirmed this to me, that the elections were rigged, contrived. The intention was that the North should rule Nigeria. Even in '56, the northern leaders were very proud and were saying, if they couldn't run Nigeria, never mind elections. They might not join Nigeria. They might leave. And we all thought, well, how would they survive? There were no industries. There's not a great deal of agriculture, some groundnuts in the north. This wasn't very practical at all. And then it was, the Governor-General seemed to be thinking that the North couldn't, even if it won an election, rule Nigeria by itself. The South wouldn't stand for that. So there had to be a partner, either the Igbos in the East or the Yoruba in the West, to team up with the North. What he didn't want was for the two southern parties, the Igbo and the Yoruba, to team up to form the government, because he believed the North wouldn't tolerate that and talked about leaving the Federation. So as I learned, in a small way at first, but very rapidly I learned about the election fixing, and as I say, this was confirmed to me by the Governor-General. He actually said that he wanted me to know the truth because he wanted me to know how much trouble I was in.
You mentioned statistics, you were collecting figures. Yes. Is that for labor and unemployed people only, or general?
Primarily, but obviously my interest was in the population
of Nigeria.
Yes, and Awolowo, the Yoruba leader of the action group, yep, and Chief Enaharo, they too, other people were saying, where are all these millions of people in the North? Where are they? We're going up there to campaign. We want to know, you know. And you see all these, you know, thousands of miles of not very developed countryside, and yet the Northerners are claiming that their voting registration figures are larger than in the South, you know, larger, far more people up there. Well, actually, if you went through the Igbo land, you know, Enugu and that, you saw lots and lots of people. If you went to Ibadan, again, Ibadan teeming, you know, with millions of people. But we didn't actually see many Northerners, and obviously not many Northerners at that time came to Lagos. So this did arouse suspicion. Now,
what does this mean for Africa's most populous nation? If the foundation of Nigeria's democracy was deliberately corrupted, can we still call what followed a legitimate system? Have we been building a nation on a lie told before we ever had the chance to speak for ourselves? Smith's confession goes further. He claims the election was rigged specifically to favor the North, not out of justice or merit, but out of strategic colonial design. The idea wasn't to create balance, it was to preserve control. By propping up one region, the British ensured dependency, division, and internal conflict.
They did do a deal with Zik, Dr. Azikiwe,
okay,
from the East. Dr. Azikiwe, there was this big problem in Nigeria. It's the same big problem in America and in Britain. How do you get funds to fight elections? The candidates in Nigeria had no money, but they did have marketing boards, which were a kind of semi-nationalized industry. And they borrowed money from the marketing boards. But there was a suspicion that Dr. Azikiwe, who has formed his own bank, the African Continental Bank, was actually bankrupt. But he was borrowing very large sums of money from the marketing boards and not necessarily repaying the loans. We knew this. We had a great secret service. All the politicians' phones were tapped. All the politicians' mail was opened. Everything that any major politician did in Nigeria, we knew in hours. We watched. We knew all that was going on.
Are you saying, in essence, that Dr. Azikiwe took money?
He was blackmailed by the British to do our bidding. We told Dr. Azikiwe that he could go to prison if an inquiry was carried out into his bank and his financial circumstances. However, we would not want to be vindictive if Dr. Azikiwe was cooperative in helping forward the plans that we had made in the best interests of Nigeria. Dr. Azikiwe had nothing in common with the northern politicians. he loathed the northern politicians. But Dr. Ezekwe went north and did as he was told. And what he was promised was this: the real power, effective power, would be in the hands of the northern emirs. However, it would look great if the president was Dr. Ezekwe and he was given a field marshal's uniform and an admiral's uniform. He asked, please, could he have a row of medals? But they said, well, no, that was a bit difficult, to get the medals. So when the ambassadors started arriving, he was known to be asking people from foreign countries, perhaps they had a medal for his uniform. We thought this was terrible, but it was said that this happened. He was very vain. And for a time, he functioned as first the Governor General, and then when Nigeria became a republic, as the president. But he had no power. And when he did try to tell the army, he said, I'm the field marshal, the army has got to do with this. They said, hey, you're just a ceremonial figure. You have no power. The Prime Minister, Balewa, gives us our orders. So there was a feeling then that there was going to be trouble. And then it was because the Awolowo and the Action Group had become the official opposition. What we British wondered, how could they win another election without the British counting the votes? There could not be another proper run election without us there. We knew what we were doing. We were just helping things along. We were doing what the British do, favouring our friends and looking after our own and repaying favours. We don't call that corruption.
Right.
The Europeans, not stupid. We are watching what's going on in Nigeria, and we too are beginning to feel there's something not quite right here, that maybe the elections are not going to be as straightforward as they're meant to be. Nigeria was being described as the showcase of democracy, and it was expected that the nationalist leaders would win through. But actually, when the election results were announced by the Governor General, before the vote was even in, he didn't count for that, he didn't wait for that. I have to tell you, the British were counting the votes, and the British cannot be trusted. They look after their friends. Loyalty is the big thing for the British, and we were friends with the emirs of the north. We looked on people like Inaharo and Awolowo as rather dangerous people. They might even be communists. That's ridiculous, actually. They couldn't be communists in 1,000 years. But this was a sort of thing that was being said. And we were, Europeans, were getting a bit worried about all this. It wasn't quite the honest, straightforward election that we were hoping for.
If one region was handed power at the expense of others, is it any surprise that distrust still defines Nigeria's politics today? How much of today's ethnic and regional tension is the result of a game played decades ago? Was Nigeria ever united, or just temporarily glued together by imperial convenience? Perhaps the most shocking part is Smith's admission that northern leaders at the time were not only aware of this manipulation, but proud of it.
Now, if you recall what you said about the role of the Governor General and the attitude of the British government in particular, regarding the fear that Awolowo, Okotebo, and the lot of them from the south are dangerous, is there a particular reason? Why the fear from the British government? Is it that they don't want to release or relinquish Nigeria? They still want to control Nigeria?
They knew that the North would do as they said after independence. If it had any, the North would just, because it was their habit, they liked the British, whereas the nationalists were an unknown factor. Actually, when they took the flag down and hoisted the Nigerian flag, not one of the major nationalist politicians was there. They weren't even on the platform. This was incredible. These were the people who had sought independence. The people in the north didn't want independence. They didn't want the British to leave. So this was a farce. And for most Europeans who were very close and watching this, we were disgusted. We thought this really had been manipulated, this election. It was unworthy. It was unworthy of the British people, this. This was no honest, straightforward thing that you would expect Britain, the mother of parliaments, to do. This was cheap and low and criminal. And I opposed it. And I opposed it then, and I've opposed it ever since. And I'm telling you the truth. And I was warned, if I told you this state secret, my life could be forfeit.
If true, this points to willing collaboration, not passive benefit. It begs the question, were some leaders more interested in personal gain than national unity? Should history judge those who accepted colonial favors the same way we honor those who resisted? And if the early elite celebrated their unfair advantage, did they ever truly represent the will of the people, or only the will of the empire? According to Smith, this foundational betrayal seeded decades of instability, from systemic corruption to military coups, and ultimately, the Biafran War. That war wasn't simply a call for secession. It was a scream against a structure that many saw as inherently unjust. If the system was never meant to be fair, how can its laws, elections, and institutions ever fully serve the people? Could it be that Nigeria's greatest problem isn't corruption, but a false beginning? And if so, is it too late to rebuild the foundation? Smith concludes by saying he did not stay silent. He raised his concerns with the British Governor-General, but was ignored. That silence by the authorities is perhaps the loudest truth of all. This wasn't a mistake. This was betrayal by design. And it raises a powerful question. Does the late regret of one honest man erase the actions of a colonial empire that knowingly destabilized an entire nation? Should Britain be held accountable, not just morally, but politically, for what its policies caused? Or will Nigeria forever be expected to heal from wounds that were never self-inflicted? Disclaimer, this video is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is based on publicly available historical accounts, scholarly interpretations, and documented testimonies. We do not promote hate, discrimination, or conspiracy, only reflection, education, and justice. Viewer discretion is advised.
I mean, in essence, what Dr. Azikiwe did, it was forced by the British government to do it.
Yes.
Collecting money from the marketing board then.
Yes.
So if any politician here in the United Kingdom tried to do that,
Be in jail.
he will be in jail. So why did the British government refuse to take action
Because
or comment on
if
it?
we nipped it in the bud, because we knew it was happening, it was even happening in, let me be fair, in the West, with the Wallowo. They were taking some money. They meant to repay it perhaps, but they were taking money. And I would have said, issue a warning now and say, you've got to behave, because if this is allowed to go on, it'll be a major offence. However, before they actually ran the 1959 election, they needed money for the North and for the NCNC, Dr. Zick, to fight the election. So what they did, my senior officer, Major Bunker, went around, was ordered by the Governor-General to go to all the major British firms and international firms, Ford, UAC, Leventis, all these firms, and raise money for a slush fund to enable Chief Okoti Igbo, together with the North, to fight the 1959 elections. The North got most of their money from the native authorities. This was looked on by the British as being okay. This wasn't corrupt because we were friends of the North. And if they tried this in the West or in the East, we might have said this was corruption. But because it happened in the north, the native authorities, public money, was poured into the government party, the NPU. So this obviously was a terrible fiddle. We were discriminating against the southern politicians in favour of these northern emirs. What we saw was that this would not be the first act of treachery. They would have to smash the action group, because the action group was strong, and in a fresh election they would be sure to win. They were pretty honest and regular guys, and a lot of the British quite admired Awolowo for his brain power, and they admired Chief Inahro, who's a bit cheeky and young and spirited, and they were both quite admired, you know, as they was like right-wing Labour people, nothing revolutionary. And so a great deal of money was raised by my senior officer, Major Bunker, before the 1959 election. And this was money put up by United Africa, by Ford, Shell, BP, and my wife, who was the personal assistant to the general manager of BP Nigeria. She's not going to tell you anything because she was a confidential secretary. I can only tell you that we were very well informed on some of the hanky-panky that was going on in Lagos.
Harold Smith's confession is not just a footnote in history. It is a spotlight on a shadow many tried to forget. If Nigeria's birth as a democracy was compromised from the start, then the nation's search for true freedom must begin with truth, not denial. So we ask, how can a country become whole when it was never allowed to be honest? And what does true sovereignty look like if we've never really had it?
Although I have been kept out of employment quite deliberately, and when I did take up work, the government came after me and behaved abominably. And they did the most appalling things. They framed me with money missing. When I worked as a humble postman, after I'd worked as a personnel officer, I delivered the post to the workers who I'd employed. And they forced me out of that. They framed me. And later, when I was working in a labour exchange, they used the foulest methods to get me out of work. They told me they would. They said, the Governor General said, unless you do what I say, you will never work again. And he offered me this, and it's very big bribes: a knighthood, a post in the Far East, in the Foreign Service, and a large sum of money. And this was confirmed later in Whitehall, and we turned it down.
Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This is a conversation that must be had. Share this video with someone who still believes Africa's story began with freedom. Never forget, truth is the first step toward liberation.
Thank you very much for your time to answer some of the questions we've posed to you. What would be your advice to the Nigerian audience watching us now?
They have potentially one of the greatest nations on earth. What they have to do is be disciplined, and they've got to unite together and love each other, be kind to each other. Like they're great to their own families. Nobody has nicer families and children than Nigerians. All Nigerians love their own family. They've got to extend that family to include their neighbours and the other peoples in the Federation.
We really appreciate your coming around. All Nigerians here in the United Kingdom and Nigeria who are likely going to watch this interview as well, we want to say thank you very much. We welcome you and we wish you God building as you go back.
Give our love and appreciation to all your peoples.
Can we again in Nigeria see a Jega happening again, or a Jega's move happening again in 2027?
In order to analyze this particular issue, I want to advise those President Tinubu to high heaven praising him for what he is not.
They said he's an experienced politician.
Listen very well. Listen very well. Oh. I said I want to advise him. Thunder does not strike twice on a particular spot. You see this thing they did in 2023 and got into power. It will not happen again in Nigeria.
You think so?
I said it will not happen. Except,
what is going to change?
I said except they're expecting trouble. I'm not joking. You cannot.
Are there going to be more electoral reforms? We saw electoral reforms that didn't happen in 2023.
Let me
we saw INEC give excuses why they couldn't transmit result live. We saw them giving an excuse why they couldn't use the beavers and all of that.
No, if they have even used the electoral law that we have today, we can get a free and fair election.
That's what I'm saying.
But what I'm saying that they did not use it. So it's not about electoral reforms. The one we have on ground, use it. Because it was only presidential election that we had a glitch. Other election, no glitch. Why was it?
Cyber attacks, more than 10,000 cyber attacks.
So why was that so? Why was it so? So what I'm saying is that such nonsense will not. Nobody will accept such nonsense again. No, I'm not joking. You see all this thing that Tinubu is thinking that he's so powerful, nothing will happen. They not have told you that if you rig this election in 2027, there will be no Nigeria.
So talking about the North now, there is a president's special advisor that just resigned from his cabinet. His SSA on public affairs, Aliyu Audu, has resigned, and he's citing disagreement on APC's one-party system. That he doesn't agree on what APC is trying to do for the one-party system and trying to, sideline dissenting opposition parties. So that's the reason he gave for his resignation.
But when we said it here, some of his sycophants said that there's nothing like that. It's like you are.
So this is like the second SCC who is resigning. We'll remember the brother Baba Ahmed. Yes, Baba Ahmed resigned, and this person now has also resigned.
And these are not Northerners. So these are not Northerners. So that will tell you what is going on. And you are telling me that these kind of people, they will allow you to rig election in 2027.
There are also Northerners who are supporting the president.
Of course, how many are they, and who are they? And when the chiefs are done, they will do the needful. By the time they go to their mosque on Friday, a day to the election, the story will change. You don't know what they did to Jonathan. No, by that, because the election will always be on a weekend. So by the time they go to mosque on Friday, the story will change. You quote me, because I have studied how they operate and I know what they are going to do. If this nonsense continues, because the way Tinubu is going about this, my dear, it irritates me seriously. For a man who claimed that he fought for democracy, should he be doing what he's doing in office like this? Should he? Look at that. He said, go and sweep them into APC. Can you just imagine? So that what will happen?
Kwaibom has joined.
Everyone that joined. What
people are expecting the suspended Rivers governor to follow suit.
No. The question is, if you join, will that bring succor to Nigerians? He's interested in making sure everybody enter APC. At the end of the day, what happened? APC will implode. Because when you eat the food that belongs to you and me, your stomach will swell up and even burst. That's it. You can't eat what belongs to you and I at the same. You can't. Your stomach will burst. So by that time, you don't ask, what have I done? I'm sure he's not thinking. He's not thinking ahead. He doesn't know what is in the offing. All this noise about whatever. A day will come when you'll be at the end of your game and you don't have any tricks to play.
Barrister, you know that the level of credible election we have in Nigeria